Good morning, ladies. Jacqueline here. Just wanted to give you a quick video about the lawful grounds for processing and legitimate interest. Jo Querrell kindly pointed out that we hadn't touched on this, and it is a very big part of GDPR. So rightly, she has prompted me to sort of just bring you up to date on some information about this. You have to forgive me because I am going to be reading from my notes here because it is quite a big topic and I do want to get the words right. So, a big part of GDPR is the why and what reason you are processing data, i.e. is it for a contract or a legal obligation? You need to assess whether the individual would reasonably expect their data to be processed at that time and in the context in which the data is collected. Have I lost you already? It gets deeper. So, an essential part of the concept of legitimate interest is the balance between the interests of the controller, i.e. us, and the rights of the freedoms of the individual. Processing is necessary for the purposes of legitimate interests pursued by the controller or by a third party, except where such interests are overridden by the interests or fundamental rights and freedoms of the data subject, which require protection of personal data, in particular where the data subject is a child. Now that comes from one of the articles within GDPR. Now for most of us, we don't have to be worrying about that. It might come to it when we're looking at our clients and what they're doing, but for us, within our own businesses, which is what we're working on right now, it should be fairly straightforward. I have put into Dropbox some information which I'll tell you about later, and there is a guide in there. So, under Article 6.1, there are 6 ways of processing data under a lawful basis. One of those is consent. The individual has given their consent to the processing of their personal data. Contractual. Processing of personal data is necessary for the performance of a contract to which the individual is a party, or for the controller to take pre-contractual steps at the request of the individual. Legal obligation. Processing of personal data is necessary for the compliance with a legal obligation to which the controller is subject. Vital interests. That's the processing of personal data is necessary to protect the vital interest of the individual or of another individual. A public task. Processing of personal data is necessary for the performance of a task carried out in the public interest or in the exercise of official authority. Legitimate interest. Processing is necessary under the legitimate interests of the controller or third party, unless these interests are overridden by the individual's interests or fundamental rights. So, those are the purposes. And unfortunately, they seem to have put consent at the top, which everybody seems to have got hooked up upon, where actually consent is not what you should be looking for. So I'm just going to read you a little bit here from the guide from the Data Protection Network that I have put in the Dropbox for you. Is consent the most lawful purpose for processing? It is important to note that there is no hierarchy of the lawful basis for processing personal data. All are equally valid. Why did they put consent at the top? I don't know. Controllers may choose a different lawful basis for different processing activities. The most appropriate lawful basis will depend on the personal data being processed and the purposes for processing. So, for each data set that you've discovered in your Audit, so all the places you're collecting the data, you now need to have a statement of proof of why you are processing that. So, for example, I have a contact form on my website and people can contact me to make an inquiry and ask me to contact them back, generally, is what that is for. So that would come under contractual, because as the data controller, by the nature of the fact that they have contacted me, this is pre-contractual steps. So that I can assign to that. So it's as simple as that. Telling individuals about the lawful basis of processing. Under GDPR, controllers must be clear and transparent about which lawful basis they are using, as the different lawful bases give rise to different obligations under GDPR. And controllers should record which lawful basis they are choosing for their different processing activities and their reasons for choosing that lawful basis. It is also important to note that in addition to satisfying one of the lawful bases for processing personal data, controllers must comply with the data protection principles in the GDPR set out under the transparency provisions in the GDPR. So we must set out why we are processing that data, what that lawful basis is. So I've got an example here, consent versus legitimate interests. So different rules apply depending on whether the controller is relying on legitimate interests or another basis for processing, such as consent. For example, if the controller relies on legitimate interests for its profiling activities, the individual has a right to object to that profiling under Article 21. However, if the controller uses consent for profiling activities, the individual does not have this right, although they can withdraw their consent at any time. That's the words that need to be stood out in bold there. I'll come back to that in just a second. So therefore, on balance, a controller may wish to rely on its legitimate interests as the opportunity to defend this decision, whereas when consent is withdrawn, the processing must cease immediately. As always, the controller would be advised to check that it is able to rely on legitimate interests by conducting a legitimate interest assessment, an LIA. This is the thing about consent. Consent can be withdrawn. So if you can find any of the other 5 bases that you can use for the reasons that you're processing data, use those above and beyond consent. You may need to undertake a legitimate interest test, which is a 3-stage test, and it's an assessment to prove your lawful basis for marketing, for example. So you identify a legitimate interest, you carry out a necessity test, and you carry out a balancing test. So basically, in your need to process that data, so marketing is a big one, you need to be able to do your business. What is the risk of what you're doing, what you're sending out, offending somebody and upsetting somebody? And in the essence, at the end of the day, if it isn't going to be a great risk to them, then yeah, this is for your business. You've balanced that out. You said, yes, I think to allow me to sort of promote my business, I am using the legitimate interest purpose for this set of data. Right, I hope I haven't lost you all there. I have uploaded to Dropbox a new folder called Legitimate Interest, and in there you'll find this very, very good guide from the Data Protection Network all about legitimate interest. plus a legitimate interest sort of flow chart, which will just show you roughly how that goes there. And I've also uploaded the master audit form, which I have updated with a new tab called Lawful Process, kindly taken from Jo Querrell's form, which she shared with me. So you will need to look and adapt this with whatever's necessary for your business. So if you open up the master audit form, just check it against your own audit form, making sure that you've got the pages and you've got the right information. There's a new tab in there, copy and paste that onto your own, and then have a look and see what headings, what subheadings you need there to put in for the data that you collect in your business, and then have a look and see which of the lawful bases for processing you can apply to why you are collecting that data or what you are doing with that data. Please take a look also in the evidence folder. I have added some more documents to there, and you'll find links on those for some of the platforms that we use to their policies that are GDPR compliant. So you can just take a copy of those, put it into your own evidence folder, and then you can copy the link and put it onto your spreadsheet on the locations tab. Tonight I've got a webinar with Coffee Clatch all about our privacy policies, and I will do another video on that for you to update you there as what we should be doing and what we should be adding from what we have done with our audit to our privacy policies. I hope I haven't confused you too much. I do get confused myself there. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call or ask in the group, and maybe we can do a little mini session if people have got lots of questions around legitimate interests and lawful processing. I hope you enjoy the rest of your days, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.